Basically, a lot of the original naming of the genetics was done based on geographic locations where they were found, which doesn't necessarily mean that that was the geographic location that it was bred or created in. And so it was kind of misleading, and then we get these sort of medical effects that were originally correlated to sort of the phenotype or the appearance of the plant. As we've done a lot more underground breeding essentially for molecules like terpenes and flavonoids, we're starting to see that those molecules actually have medical properties, and that there should be a classification done based more on that rather than the historical genetic background. Maybe you guys can take that.
We feel really, Streetbill feels really strongly about that as well. In order for us to actually have cannabis be viewed as a medicine, it actually has to be referred to as a medicine. So. The only way to really do that is to actually start categorizing or naming based on genetics and chemical profiles. Otherwise, you end up with some of the silly names that we see in the industry right now. We won't go through some of my favorite ones, but think about how a doctor would go about prescribing certain strain names, right? So it's really important that we understand the properties that we're looking at and use those to name. And I want to add as well the indica sativa thing. So one of the things that has also, through our research we found, is that the further we hybridize, the less important traditional names like sativa and indica become, because now you've actually gotten to the point where things that were traditionally sativa in terms of their phenotype or their effects are being seen in a lot of these hybrids as well. So it becomes less about the naming and more about the chemical profiles.
Up till now, it has been the funny names. Sensi, that's a seed company, we always had to deal with people copying names and basically nobody knowing really what is the background of these hybrids anymore. But up till now that worked. Also, we just have put out a material all around the world without any patents, without any registrations, and it's available to everybody. And I think that's a very, very important thing. So it's not just about the name. If we have to talk here about genetics, if I can make a statement for a moment, please excuse me. It is that everybody here realizes and has been able to see here also the last few days that in the whole world right now there's a rapid process going on, political one and a legal one, that directly influences the future of the genetic diversity of cannabis. So since we are here talking about this, and the names in the end, I agree, they're funny, but the reality is that we need them all. And sure, the products and the brands and everything that evolves from all of us is important. But what is most important is that we preserve what we already have, what we have as a humanity, at least for the last 10,000 years.
We need to preserve that genetic diversity, and I think part of that is actually preserving the right for people to grow their own cannabis in their basements, because whether we realize it or not, we were using marker-assisted breeding selection for rice and corn and all these other crops to try and create amazing things. The most successful breeding project, in my opinion, in the history of mankind has been cannabis breeding, where we've taken one single metabolite and made it 25% of the biomass of a plant. There's no other metabolite that's even close in any other crop. And that was done through the sharing, the underground breeding that was happening. And so, as much as people do want to protect intellectual property and have a variety that they can say this is good for MS or this is good for arthritis or something like that, it's very important that we do allow the underground or the small-scale breeding, I think, to continue. And we saw, regulations, for instance, screw up the hemp gene pool, and we're doing a lot of hemp breeding projects now where basically what you had happen was this 0.3 regulation was in place because the Europeans stuck it there to sort of get rid of all the Southeast Asian hemp, which most of it is 0.6 to 0.1% THC. Those are great fiber varieties that we're having difficulty actually finding even when we go to Asia now, because we find the European varieties there. That was all they were allowed to grow. France went even further and made it 0.2%, and the only varieties at the time that were 0.2 were French varieties. So you can see how even in the past, the regulations have not been in favor of protecting the diversity of the plant. And we're in a new green revolution. I call it the green squared revolution, where we not only have to worry about green agriculture, but green environment. And this plant has the opportunity to really provide us with food, shelter, clothing, medicine, all of those things that really are sustainable compared to a lot of the agricultural systems that we currently have. And I think, the focus on hemp is going to become significant in the coming years. As this industry grows alongside the medical pharmaceutical aspect.
I think I have a little bit different perspective, and so I also do intellectual property. So I come from the biotech intellectual property background, where I have seen a lot of things that have happened that are not so nice, and I also see that those things happening in the cannabis industry. So I have been an advocate for cannabis patenting in a responsible manner, because there are already forces out there that are doing things that if you looked into it, you probably wouldn't like. So at some point, we have to embrace the fact that what we're doing is unique, and there is a business case to protecting ourselves. But at the same, that doesn't mean we can't be cooperative, and so they're not mutually exclusive. Because otherwise, you're going to have people who are associated with big ag, and they're going to come to the dispensaries where you guys are selling your clones, and they're going to buy them, and then they're going to go back to their laboratories. They're going to grow the shit out of them, and they're going to breed them, and then they're going to patent what they find, and then you guys are going to be locked out of the industry. And that's what happens in big ag. That's what happens all the time in big ag. I've been involved in a number of different intellectual property battles in biotech with Monsanto, no less, and that's what happens.
I agree. The reality is that today you believe these things are good. Like the original, and this is going to blow a lot of people away, but I have to explain this. The original purpose of the EU fiber hemp list was to stimulate breeders to make varieties so they could register them for a certain amount of years, like a patent, like the same original idea. So the idea was, we need a lot of genetics, we need a lot of people breeding, so we stimulate people by making this list. And in that time, if a farmer didn't grow something from the list, he only didn't get no subsidy, he didn't need an opium license or something funny like that. And if we look at this EU list today, it's an excluding list. Right now, that's the only thing you're allowed to grow, and for everything else, you need a special permit, opium permit, to grow fiber hemp. The 1%,
it's the
or
same
whatever you want to work with. If we are breeding with fiber hemp right now, we need a special opium license, and the list that was there to stimulate us to make more varieties is there now to stop us. This is the reality we have to think about. And yes, we are a company, we are commercial, and we have been looking into many things also, like patenting or anyway protecting your materials. But it comes to a very principled problem at a certain point. For me as a person also. And I think you feel the same way. That's why you see also some ugly things. Because do we want big interest to control our food? To come back to the last 10,000 years, from who was everything the last 10,000 years? It was from us, from all of us, from mankind. And now we have to accept that some big company comes around, sticks some genetic marker in there, says, hey, now it's only us. That's theft. They're stealing from us.
What can people do to protect their plants?
We have to protect us. We have to protect the plant. This plant has been useful to us for how long? We need it for the next 10,000 years. The reason I'm sitting here is only for this message. And this message is, how are we going to make sure that the new political and legal systems are going to be taking care of this genetic variety? Because we're losing it, big time, everywhere in the world. I spent myself a lot of time in Southeast Asia. I know all the land races are disappearing there. So, in a new legal landscape, if only a few companies can do what we all should be able to do, and GW Pharmaceuticals was already purchased by Bayer, so we none of us know what to expect in the future.
Bayer also bought Monsanto. We know exactly what's going to happen.
Exactly. So, but is it going to be good for us? Is it going to be good for the patients? Is it going to be good for mankind? This is what we have to ask.
So, I would suggest that there is a way to do it that it involves everybody getting off their butt and breeding and filing patents. So if we, as the individuals, want to protect the plant, we need to band together, and the best way to do that is to litter the ground with patents before anybody else does, so that they have no room to maneuver. So again, patenting isn't a bad thing if it's done by the right people the right way, and it helps protect the plant and it helps protect all that diversity. But it can't be done after the fact when Monsanto and all the other big ag players have already come in and started to do what they do. So you asked how to protect it, so you protect it by getting out in front of it and hitting that curveball out over the fence.
I think what we really haven't touched on at all is really the modern biotechnology approaches, and how patents are going to be much more defensible when people start using things like GMO and CRISPR-Cas9 technology, which, as much as people want to be scared about genetics is a tool. It can be used like a knife to spread butter or to stab someone. It's not inherently good or evil, it's how it's used. And with this new CRISPR-Cas9 technology, if any of you are familiar with it, it's basically like a cut, copy, and paste system for genetics. So we can really start to engineer plants. And I think people are going to be able to patent even before creating them, because that's typically what happens in genetic modification, is you patent the method of creation of that plant, not the plant itself, literally. And with the CRISPR-Cas9, there's going to be almost infinite combinations of cannabinoids and terpene expression levels that potentially people can patent. So I think I agree with you. With filing lots of patents, also, it tells people what you're doing and lets them, create the next best thing potentially too. So there's definitely two sides to this coin. And with respect to agriculture, I definitely think we need to create the diversity. But with respect to medicine, there's obviously going to be a lot of patents out there.
The way patent rules work are, in the United States, if you sell something publicly, you have up to a year to file a patent on that. If you sell something publicly in Canada or anywhere else in the world, you immediately lose all patent rights. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what happens to all those things that are not patented that are already on dispensary shelves, right? So in California, I don't know about anywhere else, but in California, you can go to any dispensary, you can buy your favorite Blue Dream, AK-47, you can buy clones of anything you want. And so what has happened there is the breeders, and maybe they're the original breeders, maybe they're not, they've given up their patent rights, right? So anything that's been on sale for a year or more in a dispensary as a clone, you cannot patent. And that's exactly what Monsanto needs. Why? Because they don't have to pay anybody in this room a frickin' penny, and they can take the strains that all of you have worked really hard to breed, take them back to the lab, grow them, and then use them as their platform for breeding. And I'm gonna tell you this right now, because I've done research at Monsanto, they do it better than any of you here, right? They do it faster. They spend $3 million a day on research. Monsanto has over $1 billion a year on research alone, and that was before they decided to get into the cannabis industry. Nobody in the cannabis industry has that kind of deep pockets. And so nobody in this industry will be able to survive if Monsanto or anybody else gets serious about this industry. So in order for that to not happen, we have to get serious about this industry and serious about maintaining it as our industry, right? Otherwise, Big Ag will come in and will take over. Well, once you have patents, right, you can do anything you want with them. So if you are a philanthropist and you want to patent out the wazoo and then turn them over to the public domain, that's your right. You know, you don't have to become the Scrooge and, you know, keep everybody else out. But what it allows you to do is protect your rights in the future. And it keeps them honest, because they can't just come along and say, oh, look, I bought Blue Dream, let's call it now Blue Crack or whatever, and then it's exactly the same, and they put their name on it, right? So, and getting back to the Open Cannabis Project and the Open Data Projects, what those allow us to do is if people start investing in sequencing, right? So it's not cheap, but if you start investing in sequencing of your proprietary strains or your homemade strains, and you donate that to the Open Cannabis Data Project, what that helps do is it helps limit what Monsanto and those others can do, because now we have a database and a registry of all these things that they can no longer step on. So
we did that also. We did the same thing, and that is genetic fingerprinting of all our materials. So yeah, sure, there is ways, you know, before, you know, I'm from Holland, so the same thing with tulips, right? In the end, there is ways to, well, patent is maybe not the right word, but to make sure that you have, as a breeder, you have a certain period where you control your own product. After that is public domain, anyway. My big problem right now is that everything's public domain now. It belongs to all of us. And what you say also is like, yeah, the Monsanto's got everything, and it's got everybody's got everything from us also. So it's like, it's not that it's not out there, it's out there everywhere already. And sure, we can try to be smart and do the same thing, genetic fingerprinting, claiming certain plants, because now we're talking about individual plants that are registered also. So there's opportunities there, but what is important is, and that's where you come to the system itself, that there's always room for some people just to play around with some plants. And this only can exist in a political system where there's not just a few big companies that can make everything and nobody else can grow anything. So whether it's recreational or for medical purposes, if somebody can have some plants, it's okay. And in Holland, for example, in the beginning of the 90s, the Minister of Justice was talking about 40, 50 plants for somebody to grow at home should be no problem. Right now, we regressed to 4 plants. And I can tell you, within this Dutch rigid system, with 4 plants, nobody is going to be able to maintain some seed varieties. So, we lose. And who lose? We all lose. This is what I want to tell to you. And I see it because I've been around and I see it happening right now. Because of the change, there's the economic incentives for the people that are doing it within this illegal economy, because of this is changing. So it's shifting. So the poor farmers they're maybe doing still maintaining some varieties from generation on generation. Now we grow in Holland or in Canada or you know, are enough that there's no more import. This means that the change of the economy is going to mean that varieties disappear. And then if this country, where you have these people, if there's no room to be able to grow some plants, but only some big companies can only grow under government licenses, yes, cannabis is available, but the genetic diversity of cannabis will be lost. So it is time now to put this on the agenda. So if people are talking with politicians, because all governments also have been saying here in Europe, for example, that they have to preserve the biogenetic diversity of everything. And this includes cannabis also. So we have already a very good first step that we can have an open mind and realistic policies coming out of these people, because we show them that all these governments have this vision of preserving biogenetic diversity. So let's do it. Let's make people aware. That's why I'm here. I'm not here to sell you anything. Sorry. And we all are doing great stuff. So we also agree on many things. Like I said, within our company, we also do already the genetic fingerprinting, and everybody's looking up in a way, but in the end, we're trying to patent life. It's a difficult thing, and we still take something that belongs to all of us for the last 10,000 years, and for me, it's very, very important that we preserve it for the next 10,000.
How hard is it? It's not simple to patent marijuana. There's hundreds of genes and whatnot. How do you prove that you're the person who invented OG Kush? How do you prove that you're the person who came up with Trainwreck?
There's that. So the problem is in the cannabis industry that everybody has been, because of its underground, everybody's been sharing. We have lost that one crucial piece, which is you cannot patent something unless you're the original breeder or inventor or finder, okay? And so what does that mean? That means that anything that's already out there that we don't know have a direct line back to the breeder, nobody can really patent, which is great, but that doesn't mean that we won't see things like we're already seeing. So what happens when a strain stops selling? They change the name, they put it back on the shelves, and it starts selling, right? So that's created a situation as well where, the only way you can really get at anything is to establish a database of everything that's out there, and then use that database as the springboard for future breeding and future strains, right? At that point, then you have some linearity, and you can say, okay, this is mine, it was made from this cross, nobody else has it, these are the unique properties, here are the unique SNPs that make it different from everybody else, and here's a unique chemical profile. That's the way patenting will have to happen in order for it to be enforceable in the cannabis industry, so.
That being said, just because something's named the same doesn't mean it is the same either. And we recently started a project just to show, and not knocking seed companies, there's some really good ones, but with feminization of seeds, there was basically people just bought someone's seed and feminized it and started a seed company. So recently we started a project where we actually popped 10 different companies, OG Kush, 10 Jack Harris, and 10 Trainwrecks. And there's 10% THC variations within the same pack of seeds sometimes.
It's messy.
So that being said, every individual one of those plants is potentially patentable. It's different from someone else's Trainwreck. So yeah, there is, and how similar and different is based on the phenotypes, how that's going to hold up in patent is kind of suspect. But on the genetic level, every seed's different.
How long do you think it will take before there's some sort of comprehensive patent regulatory sort of thing? You know what I'm saying? Like you said, you have to figure out all the different variations and all the things. So is this something, it's something that we should all be on, but how long?
Well, right now with breeders' rights, you basically just have to prove that something is significantly different on the genetic and phenotypic level. And that could be, you could measure zinc content in wheat or any sort of iron content or something like that, and actually say that it's a different variety because it has something slightly different and a different genetic code. So those are in place.
So patent's a little bit different than plant breeder variety certificates because at the end of the day, there's something that comes up in patent law called the doctrine of equivalence. And so basically, if it looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, and it sounds like a duck, it's a duck, right? So if you have 5 strains and they all have exactly the same chemical phenotype and they have only slightly different genetic fingerprints, right? The question that becomes is, are the genetic differences responsible, or are the genetic differences you see actually valid because the chemical phenotypes come out exactly the same? So the patent law becomes a little bit more difficult to go after for plants, only because we don't do what's really necessary for patenting plants in the cannabis industry, which is breed for stability and breed for, true breeding, right? So if you think about most agricultural plants that, food crops or whatever, so you have mom, which is unique, dad, which is unique, and then offspring, which is always the same, right? So, and that's a true breeding strain. We don't do that in the cannabis industry, right? So we throw a bunch of seeds together in a room, a female and a bunch of males together in a room, and we get 20,000 seeds and throw them out there, and oh, that's a nice phenotype, that's a nice phenotype, and then we start cutting that up and selling the clones, and it's an F1, right? So there's no stability. If you were to self that F1, you'd be lucky to find that exact phenotype back in the first generation. If 3 or 4 generations down, you might find it again, right? So that's the difference between real, agricultural science on the patentable side versus cannabis. Once we get to that point, which is going to happen if we want to become a medicine, because we're going to have, stable genetics. We're going to have to actually do research on growing conditions, because here's another tip. You get the same mom, you get 10 different clones, you grow it 10 different ways, and you get 10 different chemical profiles, right? So how does that become a medicine? So, you need to take some of the plasticity out of the genome by getting stabilized true breeding strains, which then gets you down to the path where they're arguing, where you lose diversity, right? So then you have to have another program going on to maintain diversity afterwards. So.
If you look at Europe, and it's different than from the US, but if you look at Europe, then there's a clear distinction between medical cannabis strains and fiber hemp strains. First of all, the medical cannabis strains, they're individual plants that were registered. So individual plants, and they are grown by the universities in a certain same conditions, so that on that basis, they register right now. If you look at fiber hemp, yes, we're dealing with groups of plants basically being produced. And if you look in fiber hemp, there's a certain general thing that you can see within a certain variety of hemp, but there's always variety. And that's normal. We as Sensi seeds, I'm talking about genetic diversity, but we did exactly that. We went back to individuals, and instead of using groups of plants with groups of plants, which was standard within fiber hemp breeding and industry. So by doing that, of course, we reduce the amount of genetic diversity, definitely. And that's how we get our stability. So that's easy. But the whole thing now is like, how do we register, and how does the system look like? Well, in Europe we already have some experience with the fiber hemp strains, and the EU list for fiber hemp varieties, and at the same time we have a system for individual plants that get registered. I think it's in Paris for medicinal purposes. So. And what we'll see is also that in other parts of the world things are changing, and you get new systems and so opportunities. Now the thing is like, how are we all going to be able to see within all those systems in the world enough room, enough freedom, and so it is not only going to be big interest that will succeed, but that cannabis stays what it is from all of us. And even though we can have registered materials and we can patent certain things, in the end it is still from all of us. And it's very important for me as a breeder also, is that in the world there must be so much more materials that we don't have. We just got 300 new varieties from Russia, and it's only some fiber hemp Russian, and it was not the whole collection. 300, and it's really a hassle to sort of like maintain it. So there's so much out there that we cannot maintain, and some university here or there that has a little collection, but there's so much out there in the whole world that is not collected. And it needs to be preserved. And if new systems arrive where there's no freedom, that are very clear because it's, no freedom for individuals to clearly be able to breed or work with these plants, or maybe have some plants at home, then we'll see, I think a lot of genetics disappear. I can see it already. In some areas in the world it's happening already. But, so let's understand each other.
Yeah.
I am with these gentlemen, exactly, we have the same idea. Companies, we also Sensi seed and Hempflex, we also look at our materials and how can we protect what we have. And at the same time we've been a socialist and putting everything out there. So that was our philosophy. And we need it. We all need to protect ourselves now, and at the same time we need to be protecting the freedom of the whole industry. That's the message.
Let everyone grow.
Thank you. We're going to
Yeah.
Dr. Ethan Russo has said, the sativa indica distinction commonly applied in the lay literature is total nonsense and is an exercise in futility. So can you just expand on this?
Yeah, I mean, I call it plant racism. We're talking about all the diversity and all the individuals are different, and really what we're looking at is, it's not even the genetic code often, it's the epigenetic, it's how that genes are expressed, which is very much environmentally influenced anyways. And so we're just starting to do large-scale bioinformatic data sets on epigenetics. And we're also, when you start crunching large data, it's basically numbers are numbers and algorithms are algorithms. So we've started applying those also to people and looking at personalized precision medicine, essentially, where we can take a patient's blood and essentially look at the metabolic pathways that are out of whack and give them a mathematical score, and then apply drugs and actually see how those drugs affect those metabolic pathways. So we're now into trials with cancer, PTSD, MS, arthritis, a number of things where we've created these modules and we can actually monitor the effects of cannabis. So it's no longer guesswork. We can actually show with different metabolite concentrations how these pathways are either dialing back towards normal or not. And this is a really powerful tool, because I think in the future, and I'm talking a long time in the future, doctors will be able to actually take a patient's blood and say, based on your profile and your demographic and your age and all these other things that are going on, people that are similar to you see the most benefits from these forms of cannabis or these other medications. So we are sort of working towards being able to give a much better education, and I hope, like I said, in maybe 10 years or so, that it's actually even taken right out of the doctor's hands and we've got computers doing most of the work for us.
So, to get to the sativa versus indica. So, at one point, those distinctions actually had some value, right? So it used to be that sativas did have more limonene and had more myrcene or terpinolene, right? And then indicas had more linalool, they were more sedating. So with all the hybridization that's gone on, and now we don't even have distinct categories. We have sativa, we have sativa dominant hybrid, we have indica dominant hybrid, then we have indica, right? So, and in that whole hybrid series, this is where we see all the confusion, because now we've disconnected the morphology from the chemistry, right? So it's not always the tall, lanky ones that are, terpinolene heavy or beta-myrcene heavy, or, and so, but that's also partly because of the limitation of the way we measure things. All right, so as we get better at measuring, we will actually see that maybe there are those chemical class distinctions that we're not looking at. So recent papers have suggested that luteolin, which is a flavonoid, may actually be a reasonable way to separate indicas from sativas. We don't have the data to support that, but there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that the deeper we get into the cannabinoids and terpenes and flavonoids and some of the other compounds, we may actually be able to start referring to things based on that chemical morphology, which gets us back to what we were talking about before. It's really about chemotypes, right? And so even somebody said it yesterday, in one of the lectures yesterday, chemotypes, chemovars are what we really need to be looking at in terms of the medicine and how we categorize things, because that's what's important to the end user, right? So, and the names are less important than what we actually see in the chemical compounds.
Thank you. All right, I think we have time for one more, and then we have to move on. Hey, can we still call them indicas and sativas though if we want, or do we have to be super specific all the time? I'm just.
Actually, it would be more Afghani and what's the other one?
Ruderalis, Afghanica, and Sativa, and Indica are probably the four originals.
Yeah, no, but if you look at Robert Clark, our famous botanist, cannabis botanist, then the classification of indica and sativa and ruderalis is even completely different again, and everything fiber hemp from Western Europe is sativa only. So yeah, there's so exactly what you say. It's not so much about the classification. The botanist even goes further than us at the moment, but it's about what the patients or the users experience. And I agree with you. There's much more to find there in the chemical profile of plants also, and we'll have to see how this develops. But the classification is not so important, but it gives you pretty much a good idea or a direction. It's always been that, I think.
Great chat. My question is towards if we go down the road of breeding or genetically modifying certain strains for their strengths, whether it's THC or other cannabinoids that might be rare, and we really, modify the strain or breed the strain to the point where we're just going for that specific API or cannabinoid for the ultimate purpose of extracting it and making designer formulations through other consumable forms rather just dried flower. So I want to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, we're doing it already. I mean, there's basically two ways to make your finished product formulation. That's alter the genetic code at the front end and have the plant produce what you want, or separate all the molecules at the back end and recombine them the way you want. So there's two ways to go. Honestly, I think the ultimate agricultural hemp variety is something that's probably got 4 or 5 different cannabinoids all expressed at 1 or 2%. So when you can actually extract, you get a whole balanced extract, and then you can go and reformulate after molecular separation. But I'm a smoker. I love the plants. I love the variety. And yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for the natural plant breeding as well. However, I don't think we're going to get THCV and CBG to 25% in the next 2-3 years without GMO. And with GMO, it's entirely plausible.
I think even with GMO, we may not. So one of the things that I think we lose sight of is that a plant is a closed loop system, right? So you energy in equals product out. So you cannot over produce without the plant losing something on the process. So in the search for high THC numbers, what we've seen in our data is that the higher the THC number, the lower the breadth of terpenes, right? So you can either have a wide terpene profile and a little bit of moderate amount of THC, or you can have a really high amount of THC and only a couple of terpenes, right? So if we really expect to be able to get 25, 30%, we need to re-engineer the plant from the bottom up, right? We need a broad foundation to be able to support anything tall. So if you want that kind of number, you should be looking at things like biomass, flowering genes, that kind of stuff, as the basis for your increased, potential cannabis. Otherwise, you're going to be always chasing one number, and you'll never get a lot of any number. So
I think that's it. Thank you so very much. Let's hear it for the whole panel and Mary and everybody. That was great.
Your source of cannabis news. Cannabis News Network.